You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome to today's episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we interview young adults who are battling or surviving an unexpected cancer diagnosis. You are not alone, and I promise, by consuming today's content, your soul will be fed with the hope, courage, and inspiration you need to keep fighting for today. I'm excited to be on your journey with you today. If you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to 1%podcast.com to sign up for our email list to see the latest news and updates for all our guests on the show. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1% Podcast. If you want to join in on some of our discussions, please join our Facebook group, the 1% Podcast. To contact me directly for content, questions, or booking events, you can email me at info@1%podcast.com. Welcome to episode 32 of the 1% Podcast. I'm Truett Taylor, your host. It is finally the end of 2018, and what a year it has been. I don't know about you, but I think this year I've taken more risks in my personal and professional life than I have in any other year, I would say, so far. From starting a new business to watching it grow to the ups and the downs of that, starting this podcast here in September, I've really grown a ton and really broken through a lot of barriers that I didn't even know I had built up. And as I got to thinking about all the things that have happened this year, it left me with a huge sense of gratitude. So today's 1% moment of truth is about gratitude. When I look back into this past year, I think of all the success and failure that I've had. And when I really study what went on in my life, I got to thinking about all the people that I've met. I've met people all over the world through the podcast. We've seen so many lives changed and enlightened just by hearing someone share their story of their cancer journey or overcoming cancer or just battling cancer every day. And I just have an overwhelming sense of gratitude when I think about how this show has reached so many people in so many different countries all across the world. And I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to be on the show. And I'm just so gracious to all the guests that I've had. The benefits of practicing gratitude are nearly endless. And I really try to do that each day as soon as I wake up. I thank God for, my health, my family, all the things that I have, the business that I have, the friendships, all the relationships that I have. And I really feel like people who practice gratitude regularly, by taking time to notice and reflect upon, maybe things that you're thankful for, an experience, or more positive emotions, you tend to feel more alive. I sleep better. I feel like I express more compassion and kindness to others. And just from a cancer standpoint, I feel like I have a stronger immune system because of that as well, too. And, gratitude doesn't need to be reserved for only momentous occasions. Sure, you might express gratitude at receiving, a promotion or being thankful for something, even like my mom's carrot cake that she makes. I'm very gracious that she's made that. But gratitude can simply be a daily common thing for you. And by showing gratitude, and whether it's keeping a journal or writing or just giving brief reflections of different moments, you can significantly increase your well-being and your total life satisfaction. So what are a few ways that you can practice more gratitude? So the best way to reap the benefits of gratitude is to notice things that you're grateful for every single day. Grateful for the breath that you're taking right now, for the family that you have, for the circumstances that you're in, good or bad. Be gracious that you have enough strength to fight through those moments today. Thankful for, your health, your job, your children, whatever it is, your pets. I know my pet really sometimes, brings me a ton of joy just watching him play or whatever he does, just his personality. But think about all those things and really start creating sentences like, I'm grateful for my family. And, today I'm grateful that God gave me another day to live, or I'm grateful my sister invited me over for dinner. open your eyes to more of the world around you and deeply enhance your gratitude practice and start noticing the little things each day. I say this all the time. You can always find exactly what you're looking for. And if you're looking for gratitude, if you're looking to find great things, all you have to do is look around, and I promise you can find them. The next way to practice more gratitude is to get really excited about the benefits of gratitude. When we want to achieve a goal, using the technique of mental contrasting, like being optimistic about the benefits of a new habit and being more realistic, leads us to exert more effort. When you are intentionally choosing to be gracious and have gratitude about certain events or things that are going on in your life, your body physically tries to respond to make that happen. If you think about the negatives that what your body does when you're stressed or when you're anxious, your body, you tend to have an upset stomach or a lot of anxiety and worry, and you're fidgety. But when you express moments of gratitude, moments of thankfulness about the situations that you're in, your body tends to relax and be calm and really help process everything a lot more. And finally, be social about your gratitude practice. We've all seen the internet full of negativity, whether it's political or something along those lines. There's plenty of things to destroy us and to make us worry and to not be gracious or thankful. So my challenge for everyone is to be social about your gratitude practice, whether it's posting on something on social media about your family or something that you're thankful for, or whether it's calling or texting someone and just letting them know how much you appreciate them. That really goes a long ways. And life is short, guys. There's just not enough time to hold anger and hostility towards people. Be gracious for your wins and for your losses and all the challenges that you may have, because those challenges really help grow you and prepare you for the next step. So if you're finishing 2018 and you've got a lot of stress and you're not sure about what's going to happen in 2019, stop these final few days of the year. Make a list of all the things that you're grateful for. Start with your body, work your way out to your family, your friends, and all the relationships and stuff that you have. And really, honestly, really make a list and be truthful with yourself and focus on all the very small things that you're grateful for. I promise your perspective will be a lot different once you get up from looking at that list. So today's guest on the show is Beth Wilson. Beth was unfortunately diagnosed with 2 different types of cancer. First, she was diagnosed with colon cancer, and then several years later, because of the chemo that she took, she was diagnosed with leukemia. And her story is very unique. For one, I mean, you think my first thought is how unlucky do you have to be to get diagnosed with 2 types of cancer? But once you listen to Beth tell her story, you listen to all the things that all of us kind of go through, the worries, the anxiety, all those things that we have when we first get diagnosed. When she talks about her second diagnosis, she really goes into detail about one key thing, and it's a miraculous thing that happened regarding a bone marrow transplant. Beth didn't have any brothers or sisters, so bone marrow transplant has to come from your someone that you're related to. Typically, that's what they try to do first, but she didn't have anyone to go to. So she tells a story about how a complete stranger that she's never met before just happened to have the exact same type of bone marrow that she had and was able to transfer it over. And just the way it all worked out was just truly a divine miracle. So I'm excited to share Beth's story with you guys today. Really sit back, relax, and enjoy her story and take in all the details. And like I said, try to find moments of gratitude in Beth's story, because she definitely does that as she tells her story. So enjoy Beth's story today on the 1% Podcast. Beth, welcome to the 1% Podcast. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I know we spoke the other day about your awesome story. What wasn't awesome at the time ends up being an amazing story, and I absolutely love the way you tell your story as well too. I think all of our listeners tonight or today will be able to really pull a lot from your story and get a lot of inspiration, motivation, and hope, just because your story is so unique. And I think that's going to be just really an eye-opening experience for a lot of people to hear. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
All right. My name is Beth Wilson, and I live in Alpharetta, Georgia. I am a 2-time cancer survivor. I was diagnosed for the first time when I was 26 with adenocarcinoma of the small intestine. I had surgery and 6 months of chemo. And 7 years later, I was diagnosed with leukemia, AML. So when I was 33, I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. And it is likely that I got leukemia from the chemo that I received to treat my first cancer.
Wow, that's crazy.
At this point, I've been through my leukemia treatment. I had chemo. Then I had a bone marrow transplant from an anonymous donor. And I'm currently almost 3 years out from that.
Wow, yeah. So we're going to dig into that donor story, which is kind of crazy. So, so your story, you've had cancer twice, 2 different types of cancer, which is a pretty rare thing, I would think, for a lot of people to have. As you discuss your story and as you've lived your life, like, why do you think it's important for you to be able to share your story with all of our listeners today?
I think it's important not only for other cancer survivors, warriors, but also just for anybody who's going through a hard time to know that, life is hard and then it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what you're going through, how low you get, it gets better.
Perfect. Well, let's dig into your story. Why don't we talk about your life a little bit prior to your cancer diagnosis? What did you have going on? I see in your 20s, and how was your perspective on life? So
when I was first diagnosed, I was really happy, healthy 26-year-old. I was an ICU nurse. I was dating at the time, my boyfriend, now my husband. We'd been dating for about 2 years. And I was just living my life and enjoying life. And all of a sudden, I got cancer.
Yeah. How long were you guys dating before you found out you had cancer?
We'd been dating for about 2 years.
Okay. So you kind of got to know each other. I always hear that the first year is kind of the feeling out process. The second year, you really get to know the person you're with. So I'm assuming neither one of you guys expected that diagnosis to come in. And you said you were an ICU nurse. How long had you been a nurse when you were diagnosed?
So the first time I'd been a nurse for about 5 years. And I worked in a mixed medical ICU, so we took care of all types of patients, everything from surgical to septic to just medical issues, and also a little bit of trauma.
Yeah, the ICU is a crazy place. Had you ever worked with anyone who was going through cancer, or who had cancer when you were working with people in the ICU, or not?
Not really. We didn't have a lot of cancer patients just because we had a really good oncology unit. So usually any cancer patients went straight to the oncology unit. Even if they were critical, the oncology unit would manage them, until it was just absolutely to the point that they had to come to ICU. So I really hadn't been around that many cancer patients in my work. In my private life, my aunt had breast cancer, but she lived a couple hours away. So it wasn't like I was a primary person while she was going through that. And my grandfather had stomach cancer, but again, it was one of those things that I was removed from the situation. I wasn't with him in his day-to-day life, so I didn't really have an idea of what a cancer patient goes through.
Yeah. You mentioned 2 people in your family that had cancer. Was there any other cancer in your family anywhere else?
No, that was it.
Okay. Did you have any brothers or sisters, or your only child?
No, I'm an only child.
Okay. So you're 26 years old. You've been dating a guy for 2 years. I'm assuming things are going well. They're kind of starting to get a little serious after 2 years. And then all of a sudden, boom, you were diagnosed with cancer for the first time. Bring us to that moment where you heard those words, you have cancer. What did you feel when you heard those words? So actually that story is kind of unique because when my doctor said you have cancer, I had just been through a procedure. So I'd had an upper endoscopy, which is where they run a light down your throat to look and see what's going on in your stomach and your esophagus. A little bit of backstory. I'd been sick for about 2 weeks when I was diagnosed. I thought I had food poisoning, and we had gone out for my dad's birthday. 2 days later, I'm throwing up. I'd eaten shrimp. I was like, okay, it's food poisoning. So I went to see a GI doctor.
Still to this day, I don't know why I went to see a GI doctor instead of just going to an urgent care clinic. But I did, and thank God, because that saved my life.
Yeah.
I went to see my GI doctor, and I told him what was going on. And I said, it feels like a small bowel obstruction. And he said, no, those are very painful. He said, you wouldn't be laughing and joking with me now if you had a small bowel obstruction. And I said, I have a really high pain tolerance. I'm in some pain, but it's manageable. And he said, no, I don't think that's it. And in the same visit, I said, my grandfather had stomach cancer. And my doctor said, stop it. You're 26 years old. You do not have cancer. So he gave me some medication. He agreed. I think it's food poisoning. So he gave me some medication, told me to come back in a week if I was still having issues. So 1 week later, I went back and I said, I'm still having a problem. And now I'm in some real pain. Like it's a lot of pain. So he said, okay, it sounds like your gallbladder. And I said, yeah, I agree, except I don't have one. I had my gallbladder removed 2 years ago. And he said, okay, I think it's viral pancreatitis. And I said, okay, that makes sense. And so he gave me some medication, and my doctor was also a coworker. And he said, tonight when you're at work, if you're in pain, if you're still sick, leave work, go to the ER, get a CT, tell them to call my team in, and we're going to do a scope and see what's going on. So that night, I was working. About midnight, I ate my meal, as I normally did, and I was in such awful pain afterwards. I went into an empty room, I laid down on the bed, and I was curled in a fetal position. I couldn't even move. It hurt so bad. And my charge nurse, my friend, came in, and she said, you got to go to the ER. And I said, yeah, I agree. So she called in another nurse to cover my shift. I went down to the ER. And I was in the ER for a few hours. I was throwing up. I was in pain. They did a CT. They called my doctor and his team in. I called my mom to be there with me. And my boyfriend was 2 hours away. He was going to school at the University of Georgia. So my mom was with me, and we both told my doctor my grandfather had stomach cancer. And I told him again, this feels like a small bowel obstruction. And he said, stop it. You're 26 years old. You do not have cancer. We're going to figure out what this is. So he took me in, did the endoscopy. And while he was doing the scope, the radiologist called with the results of my CT scan. And they said, hey, she's got a tumor. There's a mass in her small intestine. See if you can visualize it with the scope. So that's what he did. He was, you don't normally go into the small intestine with a scope, but you can go a little ways into the small intestine. So he put the scope a little further and was able to actually see the tumor. He took a picture. He didn't take a biopsy. He pulled out the scope, and he actually woke me up while I was in there. And I don't remember this. He asked me if I had to use a surgeon, who would I use? So being a nurse, I knew the doctors. So I told him who my top two choices were. And when I woke up, I was in the recovery room, and there was the surgeon. And he said, hey, you've got a tumor. It's a mass. You're going to be in surgery by 2:00. And my GI doctor came back in, and he had already told my mom while I was still having the scope done. He actually came out, talked to my mom, and he said, I'm so sorry. She's got a tumor, and it's cancer. He said, I'm sure of it. And she's going to be in surgery by 2:00. So my mom was actually the one who got the news first. And then when I came out and there was my surgeon, he told me what was going on. And it was strange because I wasn't upset. And I don't know if it was the medication or if it's just because of the type of person that I am, but it was sort of like a calming, because now we know what's going on. Now we know what the problem is. And now we have a plan to fix it. And I think for me, that was reassuring of here's the plan of action. And I think that helped a lot.
So you're a young adult, you're 26, right? You've got all these things in your life ahead of you. You've got a relationship, your career. When you found out that you had cancer, you said you were kind of shocked, obviously, because that's the news. The first thing you typically go through is shock. When you had a chance to really process everything, what were some thoughts that you had that, maybe all of us young adults that have had cancer before had? What kind of thoughts were you processing whenever you were, actually had a chance to take a, really deep look inside and see what was really going on?
I think a lot of people go through the why me cancer or feeling. And for me, it wasn't so much why me. It was more, why this cancer? Why this? Because small intestinal cancer is very rare. When it happens, it's usually men over 50. And I was a 26-year-old female.
Right.
And so for me, it was, what is going on with my body that I would have a cancer that's common in 50-year-old men?
Yeah.
And that was terrifying because as a woman, I guess it's sad to say, but you almost expect that if you're going to have cancer, it's going to be a female cancer. You look out for breast cancer, you look out for ovarian cancer, cervical cancer. Those are all things that women get. It had never even occurred to me that small intestinal cancer would be a concern. And so it was just terrifying that I didn't know what my body could do. And so after I was diagnosed, it became this anxiety of, well, where else could I have cancer? I've never smoked, but am I going to have cancer of the lungs now? And so that was really scary.
So what kind of treatment you said you went on chemo for 6 months. What kind of chemo did they give you at that time?
So the surgery removed the tumor, and it had gone through the wall of my intestine by 1 millimeter, which made it a stage 2. They removed 12 lymph nodes to see if it had progressed. It had not. All of my lymph nodes were clear. So that still required chemo. So I had Folfox, and I had it every other week for 3 days. The first day was about a 6-hour treatment, and then they would hook me up to a pump. I would wear the pump for 3 days. The second day was like a 3-hour treatment. And then the third day was just to get the pump disconnected.
So that's exactly what I had to do as well. And, after a while, you start to get all the side effects that we get with Folfox, the foot and hand pain, the weird taste in your mouth, the inability to drink cold and sometimes even really warm liquids as well too. What were some of the worst side effects that you had from Folfox?
Just being tired was really the worst for me. I was just exhausted. In comparison to the chemo that I had the second time, I can look back on it now and be like, oh, well, that wasn't bad. That was a walk in the park. But while I was going through it, I remember just being so tired all the time. And I think for me, that was the worst.
So you get finished with chemo, all your scans come back clear for a while. How did you feel after, I say, being on the other side of chemo? Once the first time, we always have that nervous thought of what if it comes back and everything, but it didn't come back for, several years for you, obviously. So how did you feel every time that you had to go get scanned afterwards? Were you always a little bit nervous?
Always. Yeah. There is always that fear of, what if they find something? What if I have to do this again?
So, obviously several years went past and those feelings never, materialized or anything like that. But then all of a sudden things changed for you. Tell us about the second time you were diagnosed. Was it harder to hear those words, you have cancer again, the second time, whereas the first time?
It absolutely was. So the second time I was diagnosed, again, I wasn't sick very long. It wasn't one of those cases where I'd been sick for months. I'd been having an irregular period, and I had an IUD, which is an intrauterine device for birth control. And I had that because due to the first cancer, they told me I probably would not be able to have kids, but also I needed to be on some form of birth control. And I had a blood clot during the first chemo treatments. So I couldn't take birth control pills. So I had this IUD. So fast forward 7 years after my first cancer, I'd been having irregular periods. So I went to see my gynecologist. I told her about it. She said, it's probably the IUD. She said, but let's do some lab work and make sure you're not anemic. So as a nurse, I knew that she was probably just going to do an H&H, which only looks at the blood count to check for anemia. But instead, what she did was a CBC with diff, which is a complete blood count with differential. So it looks at every blood cell. So she did that on a Tuesday. She called me 2 days later on a Thursday morning. I was headed to meet my parents for lunch. It was 1 week after my 33rd birthday. So we were going to have lunch, celebrate my birthday. And she, my gynecologist called and she said, hey, your blood work came back and it's slightly abnormal. Your platelet count's a little low, which that was actually normal for me. My platelet count never fully rebounded after the first cancer and chemo treatment. But the more concerning thing was that my neutrophil count was critically low. So neutrophils are immature white blood cells. And from being an ICU nurse, I knew that that wasn't good. But we don't deal with leukemia patients in ICU, so I didn't actually know what it meant. So when she called, I was driving, so I pulled over at a gas station, and she gave me this. I made some notes in my phone. I asked her for the exact numbers. She gave it to me. And she said, I've already made you an appointment with a hematologist. And she told me when the appointment was. And I said, okay. We hung up, and I Googled what a low neutrophil count could mean. And Google said it is either HIV/AIDS, a virus, or leukemia. And when I saw that, I was like, that's what it is. I knew it. It's leukemia. So I got out, I pumped gas, and all the time I'm doing these normal routine things, but in my head I was like, oh my God, I have leukemia. And so I got back in the car, and she had called me again. And it's never good when a doctor calls you themselves and it's not someone from the staff calling you.
Right.
And it's definitely not good when they call twice. So she called me again, and she said, hey, I spoke with your hematologist. He wants you to go to the ER right now and have your labs redrawn. So immediately I was panicking. So I said, okay. I hung up. I called my husband. I was in tears. I was so upset. And he said, calm down. We don't know anything yet. Go to the ER and I'll meet you there. So I called my parents to cancel the lunch, and I didn't want to tell them what was going on because I didn't want them to be upset if we didn't know anything yet. So I called them and I said, hey, some of my lab work came back abnormal. They think that it was just an error, but just the same, they want me to come in and have my blood redrawn. And my mom said, okay, well, do you want to meet us afterwards? And I said, no, it's probably going to take a while. I'll call you when I'm done. So I headed to the ER. I went to the ER at Northside. And when I went in, I was so upset and crying. And I remember this nurse, when I checked in, she said, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to have my labs redrawn. And she said, you can go to your doctor's office for that. And I said, no, they told me to come to the ER. And I explained my neutrophil count is critically low, thinking nurse to a nurse, you should understand this. And she said, yeah, that's something that can be done at a doctor's office. And so I said, okay, well, my hematologist told me to come here. So I'm here and we're going to do this.
Right.
So she took my vital signs. My blood pressure was super high. And she said, calm down. This isn't a big deal. And so I explained, I've had cancer in the past and this could possibly be leukemia. And she kind of blew it off and she said, I'm sure you're fine. We're just going to redraw your labs and you'll go home. And I remember thinking, you have no idea. You've never had cancer. You don't know how scary it is to be diagnosed again. So they put me in a room. My husband showed up and they drew labs again. And in 2 days, my neutrophil count had dropped by half. So it's critically low on Tuesday. It was almost nothing by Thursday. And the hematologist came in and spoke with me, and he said, we're going to admit you to the leukemia unit. And I said, so it's leukemia. And he looked really awkward and kind of looked at the nurse as nobody told her this already?
Right.
Kind of like, why does she not know this? And he said, well, we won't know for sure until we do a bone marrow biopsy, but that's what we think. So I remember going to the unit and just being almost hysterical. It was just so terrifying.
Mm-hmm. So here you are, like twice. It seems like the first time the doctor was like, no, you're too young. There's no way you could have this. Mm-hmm. And then the second time, the nurse was like, calm down. There's nothing wrong with you, basically. Mm-hmm. This is not a big deal. So you've had two people kind of brush you off to the side a little bit. Looking back on that now, let's say someone's listening right now who maybe has had the same situation happen or something along those lines. What kind of advice would you give that person who knows something is wrong, but the first person that they come in contact with, whether it's the doctor or the nurse, doesn't really pay enough attention to that complaint?
Keep pushing, because you know your body. Mm-hmm. You know when something is wrong. And with both of my cancers, I had to keep saying something is wrong. And if one doctor doesn't listen to you, see another one. Mm-hmm. Because you're the one that knows your body best. Yeah.
So with your treatment for the second portion of everything, I know this was with leukemia, obviously it's a lot different than more of a colon type cancer, I would say, or intestinal cancer. Mm-hmm. What kind of treatment do they put you on the second time?
So the second time, they told me that I would have chemo once a week, mm-hmm. Once a month, and it would be for 5 days in a row. And it's so funny because my husband and I, when they said it's just once a month, we were like, oh, this is so much better.
Right.
Okay. I had to do it twice a month before. This will be a breeze. And the chemo for leukemia was so much more intense mm-hmm. than the chemo for the colon cancer. Going through the colon cancer chemo, I didn't lose my hair. I got a little nauseated on the 11th and 12th treatments. Mm-hmm. I had 12 total. But with the chemo for leukemia, I was sick immediately. I was so nauseated. I was exhausted. I felt terrible. Also, they admitted me to the blood and marrow transplant unit at the hospital, and they told me I could plan on spending at least a month in the hospital.
Wow.
For that first, they call it induction chemo, and that's because they completely wipe out your white cells, which means that you don't have anything that can fight infection. Your body literally cannot fight off infection. So they put you on antivirals, antifungals, antibiotics to chemically fight off anything that you might come in contact with. Mm-hmm. Any visitors I had at the hospital had to gown and glove before they could come in. They had to put on a gown, gloves, and then shoe covers before they could even come onto the unit. Nobody could visit if they had a cough or a slight runny nose or a fever. If you thought you might be sick at all, you couldn't set foot on the unit. And then, so I took the chemo for 5 days. And I remember the physical therapist coming in and talking to me and saying, we're going to work with this. And I was like, I'm fine. Like physically, I'm fine. And the physical therapist was saying, it's really important that you walk the laps and, you walk laps around the unit, you do your exercise and keep your strength up. And I remember kind of laughing and blowing that off. And I was like, I was working 12-hour shifts last week. I'm fine.
Right.
So I took the chemo, and by day 2 of the chemo, I didn't feel like walking laps. I didn't want to do my exercises. I just wanted to lay in bed. And by day 5, I was exhausted. I was just done.
Mm-hmm.
But they push you and they tell you that you should walk. And so I kept doing that. And about 3 weeks later, my hair was falling out. And they told me that my counts had rebounded and I could go home. So as scary as being in the unit was, when they said I could go home, I was like, oh, is that really a good idea? Because nobody's checking my vital signs every 4 hours at home.
Right.
My house isn't clean enough. Like, I don't have gowns and gloves and shoe covers for visitors. And we have 2 cats, and my house is not clean enough. And they were kind of like, no, you're going to go home. And this is how life is going to be. You need to have somebody to clean your house, which we did. My mother-in-law and father-in-law came over and cleaned our house top to bottom so that it would be clean enough for me to be home. So I came home, and it was almost scarier being home than it was being in the hospital.
Why do you think that was?
Just because there was such a risk of coming in contact. It was like the unit wasn't sterile, but it was very, very clean. Mm-hmm. People cleaned my room once a day. They cleaned the whole unit once a day. Everyone who came in washed their hands. They used hand sanitizer. And I just felt like my house suddenly became this huge germ factory of what if I come into contact with something that I don't even know is there. We actually had to have our house checked for mold as well, which they found. There was mold. We had a leak in our laundry room while I was in the hospital. Mm-hmm. So we had a mold remediator to come out. We ended up having to redo our master bathroom because the shower was moldy, which led to discovering mold behind the siding, which led to having all the siding outside of our house redone. There was mold behind the wall in the guest room. The guest room had to be redone. We spent $30,000 or more in construction on our house because of mold, because I couldn't be around it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So here you are back at home, right? Now you've got all this you're going through. You told me before that you had to get a bone marrow transplant, which I think is kind of wild. That does every leukemia patient doesn't have to get a bone marrow transplant, do they?
No.
Okay.
No.
So, what caused you to have a bone marrow transplant? And then why don't you tell everyone the story, this wild story about your bone marrow transplant, which I think is so awesome.
So because of the type of leukemia I had, they can either treat it with chemo or they can treat it with a bone marrow transplant. Some patients respond really well to chemo. Other patients need the transplant. And my doctors felt like my best case for survival would be a bone marrow transplant. So immediately after they did the bone marrow biopsy, they started looking for a donor. When they realized the type of leukemia that I had, they started looking for a donor. So normally you would go to your siblings first because they would be the most likely to have a match for you. Well, I don't have any siblings. So next they went to my parents. But each parent is only a 50% match because they give their DNA to the child. So the child ends up with 50% one parent, 50% of the other.
Right.
So they can actually do a transplant with a 50% match, but it's not successful. It's not as successful as a 100% match. So there is an organization called Be the Match, and it is a worldwide organization where donors they send you out a kit. You swab the inside of your cheek, and the Be the Match stores the DNA. And when someone needs a transplant, they search their database to see who's a match for it. So Germany actually has the highest number of donors than any other country in the world. And that's not per capita. They have more donors than any other country in the world, despite their smaller population.
Interesting.
So it took about a month before they found a match for me. and they actually found 2 matches. And why they went with one over the other, I can't really remember, but they chose a 21-year-old female from Germany, and she was an anonymous donor. So as a donor, when your information goes into the database and then they match you, you have the option to say, no, I don't want to donate. My donor chose to donate. And not only that, but as a donor, you can donate in 2 ways. You can donate peripherally, which they give you shots for a few days, and then essentially it's like giving blood. They insert an IV in your arm. It filters out stem cells through a machine, and then the stem cells are given to your recipient. Or you can be put to sleep. They will drill into your bone and remove marrow. Because of a protein antibody or something like that, my doctors preferred that my donor be put to sleep and give marrow directly.
Sounds painful.
It's extremely painful. It's basically the same procedure as when I have a bone marrow biopsy. They push into the bone, pull out a little bit of marrow, and then test it. For me, they take out maybe 2 tablespoons. For my donor, she donated half a gallon
of
marrow. Yeah. And so she was put to sleep. She donated, and they flew the marrow directly from Germany to Atlanta, where I received it the very next day.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. And Germany has a rule that donors and recipients can't contact each other for 2 years. So for 2 years, I didn't know anything about her other than she was a 21-year-old female from Germany. And this past February, I was able to get in touch with her. So we have talked through Facebook, through Messenger, through email. She sent me a video. And this coming March, I'll actually get to meet her.
So you get to meet the person that pretty much saved your life.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that crazy?
It is.
What do you think the first thing that you're going to say to her is?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
How do you think you'll feel when you first see her?
I think overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm overwhelmed now just thinking about it.
And what about your husband now? Have you guys talked about that first moment? Because you got it was like a surprise. He got you a trip to Germany. Is that correct?
He did. Yeah, it was for my birthday. He had been, without telling me, he had actually been watching airline deals, waiting for a deal to come up for trips to Europe. And he had contacted my donor and asked her where would be the best place to fly into, and would she be okay with us meeting, and, would it be okay with her if we came to visit? And she was so excited about it. So when he found this deal, he jumped on it. And for my birthday this year, he surprised me. He actually had my donor to record a video,
mm-hmm.
and she was the one who told me.
Wow.
She recorded a video telling me that we would be meeting in Germany in March.
Feel when you saw that video?
Oh, I was so excited and shocked. I remember I watched it, and I thought, so obviously she speaks German. She also speaks English, and her English isn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly better than my German, though. And so she told me that I had airline tickets for me and Robert, and we would be coming over in March. And I watched it, and I thought, no, she's wrong. There's a language barrier. I don't think she meant to say that. And then I watched the video again, and I was like, no, that's what she said. She said we have airline tickets. And I was so excited. And my husband, so she actually sent the video too early, and he wasn't with me when I saw it. And so since it was my birthday, I thought she was just sending me a video to wish me a happy birthday. And so my husband, he walked back. We were at Walmart, actually. So he walked out of the store, and I'm sitting in the car, and I'm just crying. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, oh my God, you're so amazing. And I showed him the video, or I just showed him my phone where the video was still pulled up. And he said, are these happy tears? And I said, yeah, they are. Absolutely. they're happy tears.
So here you are, a nurse, 26 years old, you get diagnosed with colon cancer. You get past that, right? So you beat those odds, and then you turn around and get leukemia when you're 33. So you go through that. You have a anonymous donor. No, there's no siblings in your family to donate the marrow for you. So you have an anonymous donor that just happens to be a perfect match for you in Germany and donates marrow that saves your life. So here's your life been spared pretty much twice already.
Right.
How long has it been since you've finished your leukemia treatments?
I'm coming up on 3 years since I've had my transplant.
Okay. So here you are 3 years later. When you look at your life, when you look at who you are in the mirror, when you're completely honest with yourself, why do you feel like your life's been spared twice already from cancer?
Honestly, I think that is where the why me comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why my life has been spared and others haven't.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little bit of survivor's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very real thing that we have to deal with, because why me over these other people that, they might have been mothers or very special people, but I survived and they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that I just have to make the most out of my life that I can, because I was spared, and it's almost like I need to do more to make it worth it.
Yeah. So you feel more of a responsibility now that it's been twice for you, over other people who don't make it. I talk to a lot of people about survivor's guilt, and that's definitely a very real thing for, a lot of us that go through cancer, I would say, especially you tend to see that more in younger adults than you do older people who have cancer, obviously, because there are different stages in life, right?
Right.
And survivor's guilt is one of those things where I've had a lot of people, end up speaking with therapists and doing a lot of like cognitive type things to really get through that portion of it, because, here you are supposed to be happy that you don't have cancer anymore. And then, your mind takes you to a different place where you're wondering, well, why me? Why not somebody else? What did I really deserve it? I think that's a big thing that we struggle with when we don't think that we're worth it, I think, in a way, because, and that all kind of comes back to, am I worthy enough for this to happen or for that to happen? And sometimes it can be the fear of success in a way, like you've successfully got through cancer, right? But it's like, why do I deserve that? And, just hearing that, and then, you don't have some, crazy thing that you're doing now all of a sudden yet because of your cancer survival and stuff. But it doesn't mean that your story, the way that you tell it, all the people that you impact, doesn't give them hope, So
right.
Just hearing it from me, talking to hundreds of people who've had cancer and stuff before, that, you are worth it. You know what I mean? When it comes down to being saved and to being out there and to really sharing your story and living your life, being a wife, being a nurse, doing all the things that you're doing right now. Like that's one of those things. It's almost like a badge of honor that you carry with you. And I'm sure it's dramatically changed your perspective on life and how you live your life every single day, how you and your husband interact. It probably changed his life dramatically as well too, and a lot of people that are around you.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you're absolutely worth still being here. You're an amazing person who's got a great, just a truly remarkable story that's going to impact a lot of people, especially all the people that are listening today. If you can think back to, all of your experiences so far, what kind of advice would you give to a young adult who may be going through cancer or, in your case, has had cancer return?
I think my best advice is just to stay positive. And I know that that's something that cancer patients hear a lot. And at times we get really low and we don't want to hear that. We're tired of people saying, stay positive, stay positive. But really and truly, your mental attitude is 90% of your recovery. Mm-hmm. You have to find the joy wherever it is. Do something that you enjoy and remind yourself that you enjoy it and that life is worth living and that you've got to just push through it and get to that happy place again.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. I love the way that you put that. And so, I mean, you're a nurse, so you know better than all of us, you know, the physical side and, you know, now that you've had to go through the mental side as well, too. I'm sure you had moments where you felt like giving up and you were very unhappy and sick and tired and all the other side effects that come with being on chemo and stuff. But look where you are now. You've pushed through it and you have the opportunity to really share your story. I know you've created a blog as well, too. Is that right?
I have, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your blog.
So I wrote out my leukemia story. So for one, I have a Facebook page that I started basically just to keep family and friends involved in what was going on and let them know, you know, and see pictures. A lot of my family lives in Alabama, so they couldn't see me. And because of the leukemia being on restrictions and isolation, I couldn't actually see people face to face. So I created this Facebook page so that people could keep in touch, could still see my face and I could see theirs and they could know what was going on. And that's called Beth's Second Battle. And then I realized about a year into it that what I was posting on Facebook was really just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. People didn't really know what it was like going through cancer. And they didn't know what it was like going through leukemia. And a lot of people didn't know about leukemia, even me as a nurse. And, you know, I'm a medical professional. I should be aware of these types of things. And I didn't know a lot about leukemia. So I started writing, which is a passion that I've always had. So I started writing and I wrote my story in depth. I wanted people to know what it was really like. And even though on Facebook, I tried to post a lot of positive stuff because I didn't want to put negative energy out there. I didn't want anyone thinking negative thoughts, thinking that I wasn't going to make it or that this was a tragedy. I wanted people to be positive and to know that I was going to push through and make it. And then I realized I'm also doing a disservice to people who are going through leukemia because they also need to know the ugly side of it. Mm-hmm. They need to know how hard it is as well. So I started writing my story in depth and telling people about the ugly things that went on, about how hard it was physically on my body, about how mentally I wasn't the same person that I had been before. So with my blog, I talk about the physical aspects of it, the embarrassing parts of it, the anxiety and depression that I dealt with afterwards. And I really hope that has helped people. And people have told me that has made them feel better about what they're going through.
I think the power of storytelling is so phenomenal. And that's why I enjoy doing the podcast here is because, you know, for two different reasons. Number one, as being a guest on the show, you know, when we bring up all the things that you're talking through and everything else, it's really cathartic for you as well, too, you know, to be able to process and talk about certain things. And then all the listeners, you know, we have thousands of listeners that, you know, get this podcast every month. And, you know, the people that you're talking to right now, you may say one or two things that really impacts them and they can really relate with you. And just the fact that you're not alone as a young adult, like the world's so lonely sometimes. And especially when you're sick and you get all inside your feelings and the thoughts in your head when you're isolated in your room and no one can, you know, you can't have a ton of visitors or anything like that. You really you get cabin fever and I don't know. Like I feel like after I watched everything on television that I possibly could watch, then you start kind of going crazy a little bit. Exactly. But, you know, having your story and your voice in people's ears today, as they're going through these rough moments, these isolated moments, you know, I really feel like the storytelling process helps with the healing process as well too. And I love your blog. So it's Beth's Second Battle. Is it on bethsecondbattle.com? Is that the website?
That's actually, so that's my Facebook page,
Okay.
is Beth's Second Battle. The blog is on a site called Mavillas, which is a writing website. And my blog name there is Leukemia. It's Not for Wimps.
Gotcha. Okay. What I'll do is I'll put links to all that in the show notes today, so everybody listening today can check it out.
Okay.
If people want to get in touch with Beth, you can follow Beth on Instagram at Beth Defying. That is BETHDEFYING. Or you can look her up on Facebook as her group as Beth's Second Battle.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to email Beth, you can email her at elizabethdefying@gmail.com. That's ELIZABETHDEFYING@gmail.com. It's a lot of letters that just rolled off there.
It is.
Well, perfect. Well, Beth, it was an honor talking to you today, and your story makes my life better. It puts everything into perspective for me a little bit more. So I appreciate you taking the time and having the courage to be able to share your story. I'm excited to see all the feedback we're going to get from your story and all the people it's going to reach and contact. So thank you again for taking time. And, I want to see some photos. We'll have to get some videos or something from that in March whenever you meet your donor.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to see that. So that'll be super exciting for all of our guests to kind of follow up on you and see what's going on with you and stuff. But thank you again for sharing your story and being a guest on the 1% podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.